All right. Well, I'd like to thank you all for joining us for our parental resilience webinar today. I'm not sure that when Karen was planning, she knew how apropos this topic would be to be the one that we're watching while we're all in quarantine and trying to support our parents who are home with their kiddos. So I guess with that, Karen, I'm just going to turn it over to you and let you take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. Yeah, I definitely didn't anticipate everything to be going on while presenting on this topic. Generally, in the Protective Factors Strengthening Family series, parental resilience tends to be a little bit farther or a little bit closer to the front of the actual kind of series, but it ended up as our last training, and I think that it fits pretty well right now. So it's something that I want us to keep in the forefront today as we go through this material, to really be thinking about how this current situation kind of tests our resilience. And then I also want us to be thinking about the families that we're working with and how, this is an adverse experience. We're facing adversity right now. It really definitely is a time when a lot of folks don't feel grounded. We don't have the opportunity to be able to kind of anticipate what's coming next. And I think it's really important to think about in our own lives how that impacts how we're feeling, how we respond to things, how we bounce back from things, but also to really consider the impact that this has on the families that we work with. Like I'm going to go through during this webinar, we're going to talk a little bit about, there are individual experiences and individual ways of responding that definitely differ. There's also cultural community responses that differ as well. So it ultimately is going to be a different experience for everyone. But I think it's really important to consider all the options in this. There is no right or wrong answer on how someone kind of goes through a situation like this or goes through any type of adversity in their life. So once again, thank you for being here today. I do want to let folks know if at any point you hear a little 4-year-old running through the house in the background, I apologize for that, but we are doing our best in a little 2-bedroom apartment in San Francisco. He's outside on the patio, but you never know how long his attention span will be out there. So if you hear that, I apologize, but I'll do my best to make sure there's no other distractions. All right, so let's get started. So the essential elements we're going to cover today, we're going to go through what is resilience, what does it look like? We're going to talk about how parental, and a lot of times throughout this webinar, I'll actually call it caregiver resilience, because I do want to honor that a lot of families have a different makeup, and we might have grandparents raising grandchildren, or adopted families, or siblings raising their siblings. So how parental caregiver resilience fits into the framework. So we will go over the logic model again, just to show how it fits in. And then we're also going to be talking about everyday actions that build resilience. This is the big step. A lot of folks are already doing things in their FRCs, but we're going to kind of organize those thoughts a little bit more and look at some potential new everyday actions we might be able to do. They're around valuing and supporting parents, honoring each family's culture, responding to family crises, and then building partnerships with parents and caregivers to benefit everyone. All right, so our goals. We are going to look at defining and recognizing signs of parental caregiver resilience. We're going to explore everyday actions to help families build resilience. We're going to identify actions you can take to help parents and caregivers build their resilience in your work. Give examples of your program efforts to value and support parents. Give examples of program efforts to respond to family crises. And then identify steps you will take to integrate these ideas into your work. All right, so I want to take a second, and I want folks, this is another challenge to use your question panel, but I want folks to type in briefly, what do you think resilience means to you? And this could be you specifically or resilience that you see in families, but I'd like you just to take a second to type some of your answers in.
All right.
Anything yet?
Not seeing anything. I'm wondering if somehow it's Let me ask you this. Is anybody trying to type and oh, there we go. Thank you so much, Shirley, for letting me know it was working. I started wondering if I disabled it somehow.
I think we have a quiet group today.
I know. Well, we're all doing our best. Bouncing back after a hard blow, overcoming life's challenges, having tenacity, being able to bounce back, knowing that most difficult situations are temporary.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to take the specific dictionary definition, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness. And that kind of goes along with folks saying bounce back, so that recovery. The toughness, I heard the word tenacity. So yeah, definitely. I think, resilience, it definitely means the ability to recover from difficult life experiences. And one thing that I also think about is we often come out strengthened and even transformed by those experiences. And when we think about caregivers in particular, often they have to have empathy for themselves. They have to feel that it's okay to have experienced whatever feelings it was during those circumstances. And then also to keep a positive attitude. Optimism, I think, is huge. If we get to a place where we really just beat ourselves up about what happened or believe that we could have done it differently or better, that can be really difficult in terms of someone bouncing back from something. I also think it takes creativity in terms of solving problems. And, we have to take things in stride. If I think about the situation right now, we've had to be creative. I've sent some things out just with my son in general. He's 4, and he would have a really difficult time if we didn't put any types of routines in for him. And so one of the things, my wife's been working really hard at being super creative, and our house has become a school. She's got these site letters everywhere. She's got a schedule of the day. She's got, what day of the week it is, and all of the artwork and things he's working on throughout our house. Our walls are lined with them because we have to be creative in this type of situation. People, when we think about resilience, people are able to bounce back. In essence, it's how we respond to the situation, but it's not how many bad things happen to us. It's really that response piece. One thing I want to point out is that a really resilient person, they might have a dozen of different risk factors and difficult experiences, yet they still do well. They still thrive. But sometimes folks have, maybe only one negative experience, but that really sends them into a spiral. And so it's really individualized. It really depends on how that person responds. And it's not the same for everyone. I found this quote that I thought was really powerful. The human capacity for burden is like bamboo, far more flexible than you'd ever believe at first glance. And so I think that's something to keep in mind too, is I think we sometimes have a tendency to make assumptions about folks, and we really don't know. I think that even ourselves, we make assumptions about ourselves and think, I can't do it, I can't do it. But I think in reality, if we, utilize some of the things that I discussed before about creativity, optimism, I think we can be a lot more flexible than we think. All right, and if at any time people have questions, feel free to send them over to Debbie. She'll kind of take some time in between and ask them, and I'm more than happy to stop at moments, but I'm just gonna kind of keep going through, and we will address them as they come. All right, so one important thing I want to think about is, and this I brought up in some of my other webinars as well about the protective factors, is I want to always think about culture. And culture, I want to think about, is resilience the same for all communities and cultures? My response to that is no. I just talked about individual experience, and within each other, sometimes we are more resilient than other folks are resilient. But definitely resilience is different between different communities and cultures. I think part of it has to do with how do we value the idea of resilience, or how do we create kind of that piece I talked about with creating different responses. How creative are we? One of the things I also want to talk about is different communities face different things. Obviously individuals within a community have their personal experience, but if we think back to, United States history and the enslavement of African American communities, that is an experience that happened to a specific culture. Within that culture, individual experiences definitely happened inside of that, but I think it's something that, you know, is very specific to a community, and it definitely plays a part in the resilience of the African American community. One of the things that I also want to point out is I get a little bit fearful when we start to label communities as resilient. I definitely want it to be something that we consider, but I have seen in the past where if we say, oh, they're such a resilient community, sometimes it can be a barrier to communities receiving resources. You know, sometimes folks will say, oh, they're so resilient, then they can handle this. Well, yeah, someone can be resilient, a community can be resilient, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't have access to as much support as possible. And this is something I know I've mentioned previously, is that yes, absolutely consider resilience and consider that specific communities might have faced more adversity, might be able to bounce back more, but that never should be a determinant of the amount of support that they receive. All right. And then something I wanted to think about is, can resilience be seen as a creative response to adversity? You know, if a community or if a person isn't faced with an adverse experience, you know, do they have as many opportunities potentially to have a creative response? You know, when I think about marginalized or underserved or oppressed communities, they face a lot. They face abuse, poverty, violence, institutionalized racism, discrimination. They're forced to respond to adversity more. So definitely, I think that resilience can be seen as a creative response to adversity. Folks are forced to actually look at how they're going to respond, and to create solutions and to come together and to build community in order to bounce back. So yeah, I think that that's kind of the piece I wanted. What do folks think about that? Does anyone kind of look at, what are your thoughts on, is resilience is the same for all communities and cultures? Or potentially, do you think that sometimes assumptions can be made about certain communities and that impacts our response to them? And don't feel shy. It's okay to put in your questions. It's okay to participate. You don't even have to speak out loud. You can just type it in.
All right. Let's see. I think that it's different within communities, but I believe it's possible.
Anyone else?
And you can raise your hand if you want to say something out loud. I believe resilience looks different for different communities. Okay, Rebecca has her hand up. Rebecca, I'm going to try and unmute you and see if you can talk. Oh, you're self-muted, Rebecca. So if you do want to talk, you have to unmute your mic up there towards the top of the control panel in the audio, I think. Okay, I'm going to assume that that means you don't want to ask a question. Oh,
everyone is so quiet this morning.
Know, huh? Okay, Rebecca, I'm going to try one more time. Okay, you put your hand down. Okay. However, this lessens the care given from the medical world.
You know, yes.
Oh, you know what? She had a first. Oh, I'm sorry. There's two people came in between there. I feel like for African Americans are thought to be resilient, but I think this lessens the care in the medical world. And then we asked for a repeat of the question because somebody had to run and tend to their kiddo.
Which definitely understand that in this current state. I think I wanted to get some feedback, whether people thought that resilience meant the same thing for all communities, or if they thought it could be different for certain communities and cultures. And then also just what folks thought about the fact that certain communities have to face more adversity. And so kind of how does that impact our, you know, our response or people's ability to bounce back? I think when the response about the impact that it has on receiving, I think in my head, I summarized it this way, the response in receiving medical care. You know, I actually just read an article and it had to do with COVID-19, and it talked a lot about, I wanted to see what are the disparities in terms of receiving testing and receiving supportive medical treatment for different communities. And what was interesting is right now they're not collecting data on that. What they're collecting is on age, but they haven't gone in depth enough to even look at that piece. And I think if they did, they definitely would see disparities in that. I think it depends on how close is a hospital. How do people feel about the history of the way that they've been treated in medical communities? You know, when often folks from the Latino community, the African American community, are often diagnosed with more intense disorders, you know, or conditions than other communities. I think that absolutely would make me feel a little bit more apprehensive to go into a hospital-like setting, you know, knowing that I potentially might come out with a diagnosis that is more severe than a person who is not of color. And so, yeah, I definitely hear you in that type of statement. I think it's absolutely something to consider.
Okay, we've got some more responses. Resilience can be learned. Resilience can be learned responses handed down from generations.
Mm-hmm.
I think it definitely varies per community, especially in terms of expectations. Oops, sorry, that one, somebody else is typing. And responses from each community because of generational racism. I agree, it looks
Mm-hmm.
different for each community. Not all communities are going through the same thing. I'm an individual that's a part of a Native American family, and it seems as a
Mm-hmm.
resiliency that at times within the town and within the reservation it is completely divided. With this
Wow.
COVID-19, we're all trying to come together within that divide. Our community is very
Mm-hmm.
small, about 3,500 to 3,700.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, oh, uh, absolutely. And so that's something, you know, it's kind of one of those things where I forget the exact phrase for it, when two things exist at once that seem like they couldn't fit together, but they do. Where is resilience the same for all communities and cultures? No. And is it the same within communities and cultures? No. You know, I think there are times when we can look at experiences that an entire culture faces, and we can definitely say, yeah, I think that that community faces similar adversities, therefore sometimes have more opportunities to create responses and to bounce back. But it definitely is that individual experience, like you were saying, in terms of the tribe that you and indigenous community, that there's different responses within that. So yeah, that's pretty powerful. Well, I thank you for your responses to that and for just getting my brain thinking about all those things and bringing to light this conversation. So I wanted to look at these are some typical kind of, it depends, traits, skills, some things that go along with resilience. So it includes kind of foundational approaches, and then it also includes actions that are involved in resilience. So I want to take a look at the bottom level, and I'm going to try out some new little tools on the webinar that I haven't used before. But if we look at this bottom foundational section, we're really looking at what's essential in terms of laying out the groundwork for resilience. So we're looking at communication. So how do we communicate about what happened? How do we cope with what happened? What is our beliefs around what happened? And do we have that sense of hope? So that's that kind of positive attitude, optimism. And then if we go up to the next level, then we look at recognizing challenges. So what are the challenges that we're facing in this situation? How do we acknowledge our feelings? This is huge. I mean, definitely I'm a feelings person, but I think that when we are able to really explore our feelings, that's when the healing can also happen. And I think healing is definitely a part of bouncing back from a difficult situation. And then problem solving. How do we face the problems? How do we come up with solutions? And then the next, so those are kind of the skills. And then when we go up to the top two tiers, we're looking at the steps that we take to reduce stress and to increase resilience. We make positive choices, we gather resources, and then we take action. You know, sometimes when folks are challenged with something very difficult, it's really hard to move forward. And I think that that's an interesting piece about resilience, because resilience, I think, does take some action at some point, whether it be personal action and we decide to move in a different direction on how we control it or handle it. But if we don't do anything, which is definitely, I think, a response that some folks have when we think about the fight, flight, freeze, and I know that now they've added fawn, which is definitely a little bit confusing, but when we think about that, some folks freeze, and that can really be not detrimental, but it can definitely be a challenging thing to have in a difficult situation when someone freezes. So I really think there is that take action piece. So I want folks to briefly think about a time when you were resilient. So I'm going to say we're going to do a quick activity to get people back and focused if they've trailed off into their thoughts. But I want you to think about a time when you were resilient. And I want you to look at these resiliency blocks. And I want you to pick out maybe 5 to 6 of the resiliency blocks that you felt played a part in navigating the situation. And if you have paper around, or if you could bring out your phone and make a note, and I want you to write them down. So pick 5 to 6 resilience blocks that played a part in helping you navigate that time when you feel you're resilient. So we'll do that first. I'm going to give you about 20, 30 seconds for that, and then I'll give you the next step. And if at any point someone needs me to repeat the directions, definitely you can raise your hand right now and I can do that. If I don't get any hands raised, then I'll go on to the next step. Okay.
No hands.
Yeah, then I will, oh, okay. I will go on to the next step then. So now I want you to think about your own pyramid. So I want you to think about what were the foundational blocks that you needed at the bottom. So those are what you think was essential in helping you lay out the groundwork for your own resilience. Then I want you to move up the layers, and on your next layer, think about the skills that you needed to encounter the challenges. And when you get to the top, I want you to think about the steps that you took. So that bottom is the foundational pieces that helped you navigate. The next is going to be the skills that you used. And that top is going to be the steps that you took. And when folks have wrapped up, if you want to take a quick second and type in anything that stood out for you during this exercise, maybe some specific blocks that you used, maybe what was at the top of your pyramid, maybe one of the blocks that was at the bottom of your pyramid, and we'll take a few responses to that just to see if there's any kind of common blocks that were used in specific areas or any common blocks that ended up on people's pyramids. And something to think about is one of the reasons I had folks do this exercise is I think this is something really tangible that we can potentially do with families. I think sometimes someone had mentioned actually back in the resilience discussion about things being passed on by generations. And that I'm actually going to touch on later. But I also think it's important to focus on when families have been successful in the past or when they've gone through a situation and felt resilient, and to actually spend some time looking at that so that the family can kind of tease out some of the things that they've done and some of the resources and strengths that they've used in those previous situations. So this is a perfect example of an activity that you can actually do with families to really look at, you know, how did you build a foundation? What skills did you use? What steps did you take? Because when we focus on those kinds of things and we bring it to light and have some awareness around it, it definitely makes it easier for a family to basically access those blocks in the future when another difficult situation arises. So Debbie, did we have anyone type in about any of their blocks?
Not yet. Okay, let's see. Personally, don't think that I had all these strengths and skills during that hard time. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. And that's true. I mean, I think that sometimes we don't. And sometimes it's difficult to look back and sometimes we don't. And this is something I actually probably should have pointed out is sometimes it's hard to look back. It doesn't feel easy to kind of deconstruct a situation that was really difficult for us. Um, and if folks don't feel comfortable sharing, that's okay too. I can think about right now for myself as I'm navigating through this challenging situation. Communication has been a huge one for me. We're 3 people in a 2-bedroom apartment trying to survive, both work, teach our son, be there as a support emotionally and physically for him with all of the other stresses and strains and this kind of not this ambiguity that's a part of the situation right now, not knowing what's going to happen, when it's going to be over. So we've had to really work on our communication and actually set time each night to really talk things through. We've had to be very thoughtful about the way we communicate with our son about what's happening so that he knows he's protected and supported. Coping strategies, we've had to find ways to take care of ourselves, our family in general, but also ourselves as individuals. I'm currently learning a different language on Duolingo. I'm trying to really do a better job about understanding Spanish. And part of that is because it's something I've always wanted to do and it helps me cope. It helps me feel like I can control something. So, those are just 2 of the blocks on my situation right now, but I definitely think it's something that's important to think about. And if you feel like you don't necessarily want to reflect on a previous experience, think about right now. Look at these blocks and think about what am I doing right now that's helping me get through this situation and what do I think my families might be doing? And I think if you're not sure or you feel like maybe in the past you didn't have these skills, these are things to think about right now when you support your families. How can I help them with coping strategies? How can I help them with hope? Can I reach out? Can I put something on social media that's about hope? Can I send out an email or a text to my family that's about hope? Can I do something about acknowledging feelings? Can I help them gather resources? I think that these are all things that we're looking at right now as we think of supportive strategies.
And we've had a few answers come in.
Okay.
Okay, foundational block was recognizing challenges, skill was gathering
Mm-hmm.
resources, and step was taking action.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is
Yeah.
during this time, my blocks would be hope, communication, acknowledge feelings, problem solve, gather resources, and take action.
Mm-hmm.
And then having a strong belief system was very strengthening during a personal family crisis, especially when your children look to mom for answers. That
Yes.
was a beginning for us. With that, we
Absolutely.
talked about coping strategies, acknowledging feelings, recognizing challenges. Oh, we talked about coping strategies. Next one, sorry, these roll in a little grid for me. So the next one is acknowledging feelings, recognizing challenges, coping strategies, gather resources, problem solve, belief, make positive choices, hope, take action.
Awesome.
And I said, I think at the moment we have hope. I have 5 children, 10, 8,
Wow.
4, 3, and almost 1. So their feelings range. We communicate and try to understand the problem of what we may feel, definitely using our communication skills.
Wow. I give it to you on that one. That's a lot. That is a lot of energy to have within a house when you think about those age groups. And I think that it's amazing that you're really proactively looking at how to communicate openly as a family. All right. Well, thank you for participating in that quick activity. So for folks who haven't been on before, but for folks who have, we're going to look at our logic model. As I've said in the past, I actually like to look from right to left. So the Strengthening Families Protective Factors framework is always looking at these 3 results. We're looking at strengthened families, we're looking at optimal child development, and we're reducing the likelihood of child abuse and neglect. The way that we go about that is by implementing the 5 protective factors. We want to make sure that families are supported to build what we're talking about today, parental resilience, social connections, knowledge of parenting and child development, concrete support in times of need, and social and emotional competence of children. How do we do that? We shift our approach in programs. We make sure that we shift organizational culture to value and build upon family strengths. So this is a strength-based approach. We look at making policy changes to support changes in worker practice. So those are actual organizational changes. We're looking at implementing everyday actions that support families and building protective factors. And that's something we're going to look at a little bit later. And that's something we've been looking at throughout this protective factor series. Now, individual workers, this is the folks on the call right now on the webinar. We want to make sure that individual staff have knowledge of protective factors and skills to help families build them. We want to look at shifting our approach to the relationship with parents and caregivers. So that's being strength-based, that's really working in partnership, and then we want to implement the everyday actions that support families in building the protective factors. Now, at a macro level, at the statewide level, we're looking at state systems, agencies, programs, and community leaders look to build parent partnerships, caregiver partnerships. That's kind of the piece that I've talked about in the past, where the state right now, we look at CalWorks, we look at different systems that are looking at trying to shift the way they work with families from the expert to partnerships, to collaborating with families. Families know what they need. They deserve to have a voice in that system. We want to deepen knowledge and understanding. We want to look at shifting practices, policies, and systems. And then we want to ensure accountability. We want to make sure this stuff is happening. All right. And then we are going to shift to the strategies. So we looked over here at the results again, same as before: strengthen families, child development, reduce likelihood of child abuse and neglect. We're working on parental resilience. And now everyday actions. So we're looking at demonstrating in multiple ways that parents are valued. These are the four that we looked at before, in addition to kind of another one at the bottom. This was on the first goals, or no, I think essential elements of the training. We want to honor each family's race, language, culture, history, and approach to parenting. Encourage parents to manage stress effectively, support parents as decision makers, and help build decision making and leadership skills. We definitely always want to make sure that parents and caregivers lead their own support. I mean, meaning we support them, but they are the ones who decide what they need. They're the ones who make decisions. We want them to be collaborators in our FRCs. We want them to have some kind of say in the services that they receive, in the way that we go about offering those services as well. And we want to help parents understand how to buffer their child during stressful times. So this is something that, you know, I kind of talked about briefly with my family. Is my wife and I are doing a lot of communication at night to make sure that we have kind of a plan going in for the next day on how to support Santi. You know, she set up a whole classroom at home. She set up routines. And one of those things is to help him so that he doesn't feel kind of the chaos and the ambiguity that we feel right now, that he knows that we've got his back, that we're going to help him get through this. We did a social story on the coronavirus so that he understood it's nothing he has to worry about. There are some shifts in the way that we do things that he needs to consider, but he does not need to worry about keeping people safe right now. And then strategies. So these are two big ones. We want to respond to family crises, and we want to value and support caregivers and parents. All right, so let's get to our next. So this is an activity that I want to point out to folks. It's actually kind of interesting. I've tried it on myself a few times. So what I want you to do is I want you to actually, well, let me say this. So when caregivers are more resilient, they are often stronger caregivers. They're often able to be more present with their children, even when they're experiencing a crisis, which in turn, we showed that result. What we're hoping for is that there's a reduction in the likelihood of children being abused and neglected. And when parents are under stress, when parents and caregivers are under stress, there's definitely more of a probability that children will be abused and neglected. So we definitely want to support parents in being as resilient as possible so that we reduce the likelihood of any negative impact that it has on children. If you think about resilience, those folks who have hope, who have optimism, who are looking at planning, who are coping, they're definitely, some of those resilience blocks, they're definitely more able to be patient with their children, especially when it's a difficult and challenging time. Okay, so this is the activity. I want you to actually put your hand in front of your face with the palm facing your eyes. So bring your hand up, put your palm in front of your face, and have it close to your face. Get as close as possible, but do not let your palm touch your face. And I want you to imagine that in the middle of the palm of your hands, you have a problem. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you just to think about your answers. Keep your hand up. All right. So when you think about the problem in the middle of your hand, can you see it clearly? Can you see beyond the problem? Does the problem make you feel closed in, as if there is no way around it? And can you focus on anything else? Okay, so I'm going to ask those 4 questions again. Keep your palm as close to your face as possible with the problem in the middle. Can you see the problem clearly? Can you see beyond the problem? Does the problem make you feel closed in, as though there is no way around it? Can you focus on anything else? All right, so I want you now to move your hand away from your face. Keep it up with palm facing toward you, but move it away from your face. Now I'm going to ask you those questions again, and I want you to think about your answers and how they differed from before or they're the same as before. When you have your hand a bit farther from your face, when the problem is still in the middle of the palm, can you see the problem clearly? Can you see beyond the problem? Does the problem make you feel closed in, as though there is no way around it? Can you focus on anything else? So if you could just briefly type in maybe how something stayed the same or how it changed in terms of your answers to those questions. So when you moved the palm farther away from your face, when you moved the problem farther away, could you see it clearer? When you moved it farther away, could you see beyond the problem? When you moved it farther away, did you still feel closed in or did you not feel closed in? And when you moved it farther away, could you focus on other things? So I'll let Debbie kind of get those responses from folks. And then I'm also going to say, one of the things to think about is that when we have our problems so close to our center, they often overwhelm us. Debbie and I were just talking about this before we started the webinar, that there's so much inundation with resources and news and all of these things right now about COVID-19. And the more and more that we get, the more and more I personally feel overwhelmed. It becomes the center of everything. And something that I've had to do is really step back from that and really reduce the amount of things that I read, reduce the amount of things that I pay really close attention to, and essentially move that problem away from my face. I'm definitely still going to be there, but if I leave it at the forefront, it's really challenging for me to think about other things. Something that's interesting is when I think about that, I control that piece of this. I control my ability to push the problem a bit back from me. I'm not saying the problem is going away, but I'm saying in this moment, I need to push it back from my face, and I have the ability to control that piece. And that makes it easier for me to get through this. So Debbie, did anyone give any responses?
They did. Okay. All the answers changed except feeling closed in. Still felt closed in each way. Otherwise, a big improvement with the hand moved away a bit. Moving the palm further away can allow us to see the bigger picture with a different perspective. You see the grander picture and maybe what is really important. The only change was I couldn't see the real problem when it was so close. Otherwise, I could see around it and could see there was something beyond the problem.
Mhm.
When I moved further away, I was able to see the problem a little more clearly. I was also able to see things and think about other things.
Mhm.
Palm further away felt less closed in, improved clarity on possible solutions, decreased stress, and more hope, ability to handle challenges.
Mhm.
When it was close to my face, I immediately went into mindfulness.
Hmm.
I could see, and this is another one, I could see more clearly and focus on other things when I moved my palm. I need to do this. I agree. I did it too, and it was like, huh. I love
Yeah.
that it's a very visual way
Mm.
to think about that. So yeah.
And this is something you can do with families. So a lot of the things I try and weave into the trainings are specific activities that you could do with families to help them kind of look differently at things, to help shift perspective a bit so that they can maybe better, not better, but so they can find a different way to sometimes tackle difficult, challenging situations. So thank you for that, folks. Oh, and that's the hand moving in. There you go. So this next section is going to be a little bit about, and I know I'm actually not going as fast as I had hoped for today. So I apologize on that. I might have to go a little bit quicker as we move forward. But someone had brought up about generational, that our way of kind of approaching difficult situations and our resilience can often be connected to generational, like older generations or how things are passed to us. And so this is something I want to look at is the power of our stories. So our stories define us. And when I think about stories, I think about the stories we say about ourselves, our family, who we are, kind of our narrative of us. They affect our well-being, our relationships, our present and our future. They are vehicles of energy, vessels of possibility. They contain infinite potential, and we can harness light and power from the experiences of our lives. Every ordeal we have suffered holds some treasure for us. Every catastrophe has stripped us of something and given us something. So that's kind of that piece about when we get through a situation, there's a way that we can bounce back, and it strengthens us. It essentially can transform us. And that was Jane Phillips, a journalist that I found, and I just really liked that quote, and looking about how the things we experience become our stories. They become our narrative of our life. And then Hannah Arendt, I believe is how you say it. She was a German philosopher, and she said the story reveals the meaning of what would otherwise be an intolerable event. So we face these adverse experiences, and I think often the story that we tell after that definitely brings meaning to it. It shows, that's also when we were doing the resilience blocks. You know, we're mapping out our story. And I think that it definitely takes on so much power when we look at it that way and when we create a narrative around our experience. So life stories that help build resilience. After this slide, I'm going to go through the do you know scale, but there's been research studies that have actually shown that the more connected we are to our history and to our family stories and to our narrative, it can actually help us to be more resilient when going through difficult situations. So the do you know scale, it looks at knowledge of heritage and family history, family stories that are told to us, and often they showed that in this research study, it was told to us by mothers or grandmothers at family gatherings. To me, this can be anyone who tells the stories. We often teach a lesson or to help children get through physical or emotional hurts. I know I tell stories when I was little all the time to my son, and a lot of times it's to teach a certain lesson so that he can kind of have a connection to what I've experienced and also be able to look at some ways to resolve the conflicts that he might be experiencing in the moment. And then it's a secret family recipe for resilience. So a lot of times, and I think about this, especially during the enslavement for African Americans, I think this was huge, is the storytelling. And in that aspect, it was not only storytelling within communities, but it was also a lot of times music and song passed through different songs that talked about the strength and the resilience of different communities. All right, so this is the do you know scale. And this was done by Emory University, the Family Narrative Project. The study looked at how stories were transmitted. I know that they specifically looked at mothers and grandmothers, but a lot of it was, you know, what are people saying at family dinners, on vacations, holiday celebrations? And they said the study basically showed that the frequency of stories, it actually correlated with higher levels of cohesiveness and contributed to what is called an intergenerational self. So this is a big concept, is essentially what was said earlier about this, you know, stories from other generations. It actually contributes to something that's called an intergenerational self. So the study discovered that the intergenerational self and the personal strength, moral guidance that comes from this intergenerational self, it actually was associated with increased resilience, better ability to adjust to things, and it improved the chances of positive responses when it came to clinical interventions and educational outcomes. So it's beyond just you know, how we respond to different services, but also like academic and educational outcomes. The more that we are connected to this intergenerational self helps improve resilience, and it actually helps with additional outcomes. This is something that might be interesting to actually look at with families. You know, how connected are they to the stories of their loved ones, of the people before them, or not? I mean, I know that sometimes people are estranged from families. They might not feel connected to other generations, but I definitely think that's something to consider, because I think it absolutely impacts the way that we respond to situations. All right, partnerships. So this is key in this entire approach. The Strengthening Families Protective Factors is how we partner with families. So I'm going to go through, this is connected to the valuing and supporting parents, caregivers. It's about being open and accepting all families. It often requires, this is something I want to put out, it requires doing explicit things to help recognize families, especially if they are from a different culture or speak a different language or have a family structure that differs from the traditional nuclear family. So we say partnerships, but we have to do explicit things. We have to put signage in our FRCs. We have to make sure things are in different languages. We have to do explicit, intentional things to help build partnerships, because partnerships, they benefit everyone. They increase respect and support for caregivers and providers. The better your partnership with families, not only are you showing increased respect and support for the families, but they feel more respect and support for you. We're looking at caregivers benefiting by having more people available to offer support. If there's a good partnership, then they're more likely to reach out to you. And then children benefit because a caregiver who feels respected and supported, they are more able to give them nurturing, responsive care that they need. Because the caregivers are getting support from someone, they're more likely to be able to give that nurturing, responsive care. All right, so things to consider. These are just questions I'm going to throw out there. Nothing I want you necessarily to share back, but I want you to think about, if a family who is involved in the child welfare system came into your FRC, do you think they'd feel valued and respected? If a family has two same-sex caregivers, do you think they'd feel valued and respected? And if there's a family within the community that your FRC serves, they might not necessarily be represented in who's actually walking through your door, but they are a part of the community. Do you think they would feel welcomed at your FRC? Ways to do that are to consider, what are the different pictures we have on our wall? What is the signage? What are the translations we have available? What are the books? What is the food that we offer in our trainings? Do we think that these families from differing backgrounds would feel accepted and valued at our FRC? So I definitely think those are questions to consider whenever you're putting on an event, whenever you're looking at the environment that you have for families, when you're looking about putting out information, is to consider those things. And one that I hadn't thought about much was this piece about a family that's involved in the child welfare system. Would they feel valued and respected at your FRC? All right. I am actually going to have to probably skip this, given the time that I have. The crack pot, I will actually try and look this up on YouTube. It's about a little boy who's walking with two pots on his shoulder. One does not have cracks and the other has cracks. And he walks and he walks, and the cracked pot leaks. And essentially, at the end of the walk, the pot says to him, "Why do you keep me when I'm broken?" And the little boy says, "Because you water the flowers as we walk along the path." And so I think the moral of this is essentially to look at, although families might not seem perfect, everyone has something to offer. And I think sometimes it takes us being explicit and being able to look for those strengths and what that family has to offer, and for being able to help the family bring that to the forefront so they can recognize that they don't have to be perfect. And sometimes their imperfections are actually things that really bring diversity or bring things that other folks might not necessarily have as attributes into the fold. So, I think about it in the way that we look at disability. When we reframe and we don't look at it as a lack of ability, we look at it as folks who have some kind of differently abled ability to do something. I mean, a person who has mobility limitations, they find ways to do some things that other people can't in extraordinarily creative ways. And so I think we need to really harness that and look at that and explicitly celebrate that within our FRCs. All right, so responding to a family crisis, these are specific steps that you can take to support a family. You always want to observe and see how the family is handling the situation. You want to ask questions. So look, what are their needs? What are the strengths that already exist? And what are those past experiences? How did they get through things before? You want to be knowledgeable and know the resources. You want to provide those resources, whether it be respite care resources. I think this is one that's missed a lot at FRCs, is how do we link families to substance use support services? We want to be available. Make it as easy as possible for caregivers to reach out. And then make sure you are getting your own support. So looking at that self-care piece. So those are things I really want us to think about in terms of responding to a family crisis. I apologize for needing to go quickly through them, but I think these are things that we can look at when a family comes in and something, say they just got an open CPS case. Let's look through this, observe, how are they handling it? Ask questions, what do they need during this? What are their strengths? If you're talking to a child welfare worker, point out the family strengths, point out what they're doing well. Hopefully working with the CPS worker can help to develop a plan that really looks at those strengths. And then collaborate with the family to create that plan. Be knowledgeable about the resources that you can link the family to. All right. And then this is something that I want folks to take a moment to do after the webinar. So we looked at the strategies before, responding to a family crisis, value and support parents, and then the everyday actions. We talked about some potential everyday actions today. So after this webinar, I'd really like folks to sit down. You can do a screenshot right now of this page on your webinar, or you can download the PowerPoint. It's actually in the, it says handout section, I believe.
Yeah, the handout section. They should be able to download the PowerPoint from there. Yeah.
Yeah, so download it from there. Take some moments to write down what are your concrete examples that you do at your FRC to demonstrate the ways that parents are valued, to honor each family's race, language, culture, history, to encourage parents to manage stress, to support parents as decision makers, to help parents understand how to buffer their child during stressful times. You can do this in general, or if you want to focus specifically on how you're doing it right now with families during the COVID-19 coronavirus situation, I think that might be a great example to kind of organize your thoughts. But I think it's important to really look at what are you doing right now, and if anything stood out for you today or it generated some new ideas, to really think about what you can do moving forward. All right. That was a lot. I apologize for going a little bit too long into the actual presentation, but we still do have a few minutes for questions if anything comes up for folks.
All right, so you can raise your hand now if you'd like to ask a question live, or you can just go ahead and use that question panel that you've been using so successfully already.
I must have covered everything.
You probably, yeah, everybody's just, ready to go. I think it's a lot to think about every time we do one of
Yeah.
these. I think even though I've done the standards of quality or family strengthening and support, which are partly based on these, it's still always a reminder, I think, of each time, um, of how to use them in our daily lives. All right.
Okay. If we don't have any questions, then I will just say thank you so much for being on this morning, and thank you so much for the support that you give to the families. You know, most of us know, because we've been in situations like this before, that, you know, it's difficult to navigate this world as it is. It's difficult to navigate if we have a child who has a disability or special health care need, and the fact that you are there to help walk them through this really, what can be a really challenging journey, is something else. And I just want to thank you for that and all the work that you do.
All right, you've gotten some thank yous, and then I have a question about can I share that piece? I don't know if that means that very last part, um,
You can share whatever you'd like to
of
share
the
from this.
concrete
I
example.
have,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I have no problems in people sharing the information. I just wanted to get out there. So, you know, and if you ever need any follow up and want to reach out to me, I'm more than happy for that as well.
All right. And if anybody has not had a chance to download the handout yet, just raise your hand. I'll stay on. Um, but otherwise, I think we're finished for today. Go back, be safe, hug the family. And we're sending out those, if you're a director, we're sending you out a weekly resource list that you can share with your staff. So just hang in there. We're going to get through it. You guys, I think I started out this thing with, always look, the quote from Mr. Rogers' mom, always look for the helpers. There's always helpers, and you guys are the helpers. And I'm so proud to be associated with all of you as we're all working hard to do what we can during this time. So keep an eye. We'll get a newsletter out with, we're making some revisions in some of our professional development. Keep that in mind and join us for our next webinar. And we'll see you then. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you.